Right, hello there. So per the previous stream, we're going to take a look at bringing this scene that we were putting together in Classic, and we're going to get that into, or bring that into Studio. And of course that probably involves lots of shenanigans. So what we're going to do as well is take a look at normal maps. Because that's one of the reasons why you want to use Studio. So we're going to take a look at how you make normal maps, or a straightforward way of making normal maps and doing them in a way that you'll end up with something that looks, emphasizes the object without doing, it just basically emphasizes the object, because normally the way that people make normal maps is not the right way to make them, and it causes all sorts of problems. But anyway, we'll get to that later. So first thing we need to do is import or set up our scene in IMVU Studio. So this is the scene in Classic, and it's two meshes, set of images as normal, and then we've got a set of actions. So these are just static poses, and it took a while to get these sorted out, so that's why there wasn't a stream yesterday, because yesterday was spent trying to sort out these pose issues that occurred. So they're all now fixed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they won't cause problems when we import them into Studio. So let's do that now. So what we're going to do, so this is Studio, if you've not seen it before. It looks a little bit like Photoshop or GIMP, which I understand is the look they were kind of going for. So that's why it looks the way that it does. Hang on a second. Oh, it looks like YouTube is having problems. We'll continue streaming anyway. So, we want to make a room. So for that, we need to click on the Create button at the top here. And IMVU is being a little slow. It's been a bit slow lately for some peculiar reason. So let's just click on the category and see if that forces it. So we want rooms. There we go. So we want the 3D example scene. So click on that, highlights in the preview, so we get to see what we're looking at, which is that blurry brick wall, which has never been fixed. And then click the Derive button. So this is what we're replacing. Now, the way that we import and set up our projects in Studio differs slightly from IMVU Classic. So we have to first import the scene. So edit, import. So we click on this hamburger thing at the top there. Edit, import, browse to the mesh. Browse, where is it? The mesh is 34. Open. and then it'll go through the FBX import process. Mesh is too big. That's fine. So set up the FBX. We can deselect and then just select the ones that we want. So we want furniture and stage. That's the two meshes. We don't need the helpers, so we can deselect all of those. Change the scale 0.01. Bones, that's all right. Oh, dagnabbit. Right, let's do that again. 0.01, that's fine. Next. Right, so we don't want the materials that are associated with the avatars. So deselect all of those. Let's double check. Right, that's all right. Next. No animation. Preview. So that's what it's bringing in. Skeleton, meshes, and then the materials. So import. Let's see if this doesn't crash. Oh, there we go. So it's brought in all our bits. Which is the asset tab. So this loads by default, which shows us all the components that have been brought into the file or into the project. But what we want to do is replace this background mesh. And the way that we do this differs in Studio than it does in Classic, because it just automatically overrides it in Classic but not in Studio. So we have to select the mesh. We then have to, where's the background gone? Yeah, that's the materials. That's the mesh. So there should be. Oh. It's previewing rather slowly. Oh, there we go. Okay, that was a little weird. So it's automatically assembled everything. So this differs slightly to accessories and a couple of other items where it'll list. So if this were an accessory project, it would list the glasses, and you have to select the glasses and then change the asset or the mesh that would be associated with the glasses. But for rooms, it doesn't seem that we need to do that. Either that or they've changed it and not told anybody. So it's brought in everything, but what we want to do is replace our TGA images. So these are all TGAs, as we were talking about in the previous video. We want to replace those with JPEGs. So materials. We should really be able to get rid of these, but that's the one thing that they need to sort out, actually, is to remove, because we don't have a way of removing the old assets from the project. But let's select lamps unlit, click on the icon, that opens a pop-up, and then what we want to do is click the add image button, we want to find our JPEG. So this is wall lamps. So select, open, and then it applies it, and then we can preview that. And we'll tap our fingers whilst we're waiting. Because we can't really do anything whilst we're waiting. Well, let's try that. So I'm just going to replace, whoops. Oh. Shelf. So this is going to be a bit of an issue when we're using Studio, because the way that they are now authenticating assets, something is being sent to IMVU and we have to wait for it to do what it needs to do. So that's something to be aware of. Shelf. There's the shelf. Close. Mirror. We won't wait for it to refresh. Dummy. Cloth. And at least with Studio, when you replace the images, so we're replacing them with JPEGs, and it actually updates and uses the name. So it switches it from TGA in this instance to JPEG. So rug. I think that's that one. Bench. Okay, and for this one, we need to enable alpha threshold, I think, and we'll have to do a preview. So this is going to be a bit of an issue, this waiting for the program to update itself, which obviously we don't have an issue with that in Classic because we just click the Apply Changes button and it works automatically. But the security or whatever it is, there we go. So whatever the feature is that is updating that's causing this delay is going to be a challenge to work with, to say the least. So couch side, what's that one? That's just couch. No, it's wall. Taylor's wall. Image. So as you can see, it's not quite as straightforward to use as Classic. And it's going to take a bit of getting used to. Hi, Colin. I would suggest you stick with 2.83 LTS because that's going to be fixed in the sense that you won't have to keep bothering with constantly updating and getting to grips with new bleeding edge features that might break something when you're in the middle of it. So what did we just do? Oh, that was the carpet. Then couch. Right, let's preview all of that. Double check we've got everything in place. Right, so I won't bother with bringing in the poses for this because what we're going to look at is the textures and setting up normal maps. So let me just, that needs to be set to self-illuminate. And we need to change the environment a little bit. So we're changing the ambient light, ambient light. Which is the equivalent of what we would do in the config tab. So we're changing the ambient light, doing that here. Preview. actions, skeleton, materials. Oh no, that's the mesh, and then the materials. Right, so for the normal maps, what I'll do is just bring in a couple of normal maps just so that we can see the effect in effect. So couch, see if I can get a bit closer to these. Whoops. So click on the normal map icon and we load in an image in the same way we did before, but we're loading in a normal map. And for this, it's going to be important to use PNG images for this, not JPEGs, because JPEGs introduce artifacting. So basically the compression that JPEG uses introduces anomalies into the image that you don't want in a normal map, because the normal map will interpret those the color anomalies that JPEG introduce as normalized data, and you'll end up with the compression. So when a JPEG compresses an image, depending on the type of compression algorithm that's used, it basically blocks the image into segments like so, and at the borders of these blocks there's usually a little bit of visual artifacting, and as it subdivides each of these blocks into smaller blocks to do the compression, you end up with more artifacts. Now, because normal maps deal with a very specific color palette, which is these purple colors, it'll interpret those anomalies as structural data, essentially, and it'll make the result or the effect of the normal map in IMVU look a bit odd. You'll start to see checkers, essentially. So the anomalies that are in the normal map, or the anomalies that are in the JPEG, will come through as anomalies in the normal map. So you'll basically ruin the effect of the normal map. So what are we looking at here? Taylor's couch. So that's the couch. So to avoid that, you want to try and use PNG and compressionless. So select import and click preview. I don't know how easy this is going to be visible, because we're not using moving lights. Yeah, it's not quite as visible as I was hoping it, so let's try doing something. Let's just use one of these. Let's get a darker one. Oh, it has worked. Right. Hang on, Colin. I'll get you a link. But basically, you want to stick with 2.8 because it's long-term support. So that means it's feature locked. So the foundation is not going to be updating it with respect to adding new features, new bleeding edge features that we may not necessarily need to use for IMVU. And as far as I'm aware as well, IMVU themselves are building the tools. So that's Studio, what we're looking at now. Copy link. They're building Studio with Blender LTS in mind as well, because that gives them, well, it'll be about a year now, a year's worth of support where they know IMVU and Blender, as they build the tools, will be compatible with one another. So there won't be any issues. So if you use Blender 2.90 and any other version of Blender after that, you may encounter compatibility issues if you start using those later versions, the newer versions, whenever they come out with Studio, because IMVU is building Studio with respect to LTS, long-term support. Right, so putting that flat color in, we can see all this shape, all these little marks. All of that is being done by the normal map. And you would see this more clearly if we had what's called dynamic lighting in the scene. So if there were an animated light in this scene, we'd get the impression, or would be able to see the normal map and how it behaves with respect to the light, and the impression that it gives us that there's surface detail on the couches. But because we've got our normal texture in place, that's a little tricky to see. Replace. Right, so let's do it to the wall. So close that, close that. Where's the wall? Couch, oh right, okay, couch side. So what I'll do with this is I'll temporarily, actually let's just use that. Preview. Right, excuse me, so our wall is purple. So let's add the normal map for the wall. Add, same thing again, PNG. So that's that one. Apply. Why is it adding that to the... It's added that to the diffuse for some reason, so let's replace that with a different color. So there, we can see that the detail that, come on, is this thing going to crash on us or what? So we can see that these lines, all of this is provided by the normal map. So again, if we had a moving light, what we would essentially see is this structure giving the impression of shading as the light travels back and forth across it. So let's get that back into place, and then we'll take a look at making a normal map. Yes, replace. So we can't really see the effect because we're using fixed lighting in IMVU. So if there were a swinging lantern in here, we'd be able to see the effect much more clearly. But that's loading normal maps into IMVU Studio, but to actually make one, so what you want to do is use grayscale images. Hang on, let's, where is this? There's a tutorial somewhere. Right, here we go. This is an oldie but goodie. If you want more details on how not to make a normal map, read that. What you need to do, so this is our let's get the desktop. Right, so this is the image that's loaded into IMVU. This is the top of our bench, which is all the way over here. Let's get the avatar standing here. So this is the top of the bench. So to make a normal map from this, depending on how you've built your texture, whether you've painted it or however you've made it, the primary rule that you want to keep in mind when you are making something that will be converted or used as a basis to create a normal map is that shadows equal depth, or darker tones equal depth, lighter tones equal height. So converting the image on the left to the image on the right, what we have is the edge of the desk or bench. What's that called? The the edge of a desk. Whoops. So that's the edge of a desk, and then you've got usually got some sort of patterned shape on the edge of a desk, on a fancy desk at least anyway. So depending on how you do that edge, it can be used to create the normal map as a grayscale value. So where you want, so if that's our edge, desk edge, so where you want something like that, this is higher than this. So this means that this section is going to be, let's say, white, but this section is going to be light grey. And that difference equates to a height difference within the normal map, which will eventually produce a normal map that will create the impression of this shape, because it'll interpret the colours, white, it'll interpret white as being a higher value than this section, and this difference is converted into, I say converted, it's essentially interpreted as depth or 3D structure, because there's a disparity between the two colour values or the two tonal values. So what we end up with is a grayscale that should look something like this. So you want to flatten, desaturate, get rid of all the colour. So we've got rid of all our shadows, shading, even wear marks. So all we end up with is just the base wood texture and the trim, how to do this, there we go, and just the trim shape as a series of tonal values that will equate to depth. So this is essentially like working with a bump map. So if you're familiar with bump maps, which are just basically grayscale images, working with normal maps when we're producing those in 2D is similar. So what we want to end up with is a grayscale image like this one, which we can then copy. We can either copy, paste or save. Copy, and depending on your photo editing tools, do we have GIMP? Yes, we do. Let's open GIMP. Whoops, open the wrong monitor. So if you have GIMP, you can just drop that, paste. So that's our grayscale. And then we can use GIMP to convert this into a normal map. So it's filters, map, where is it? Where's it gone? Have they changed it? Oh, generic. Oh, they've moved it. Okay, so filters, generic, normal map. We'll get the pop-up, and we don't need to do anything sophisticated with this, but it produces our normal map, so it converts the grayscale colors, so from white to black with gray in between, it converts them to normalized tonal values, which give us our surface depth essentially. You can OK that and then save it out as a lossless image, so bitmap, PNG or Targa. Alternatively, if you don't have GIMP, what you can do is download a tool like NJob and just copy paste. So we'll do the same thing again. Paste the image into the tool, filter, height map to normal map. We'll get the filter settings. OK, and again you can save it as a bitmap, TNG, a PNG or TGA, lossless. Don't save these as JPEGs. I don't think this gives you the option to do that actually. Yeah, it doesn't. So that's the conversion process. So when you're actually making your textures, actually let's just load this into Studio. So that's the edge. We want bench, normal, add image, PNG for this again. Preview. It's not quite as clear as it could be, again because we are working with fixed lighting. But again, if we had moving lights, we'd be able to see the effect in play. But let's close that, and let's do a full conversion. Let's do the carpet. So this is our carpet texture. So that is that. And we want to make a normal map for that. So we need to just get rid of the color, but we don't want to flood fill it and just get rid of it. We just want to get rid of all of the pattern stuff so that all we have left is the texture that we used to create the image. And then what we'll have to do try and set this up in a way that we end up with something that removes. So we do have some bump in this image because that texture, the original texture, is just a, where has it gone? It's just a filter. Which one was it? So it's basically something like this. So we are using a pre-built filter to create an effect. In 2D, that's fine because it gives us a light side and a dark side. But for our normal map, that's problematic because what it does is it produces a normal map that shows. Let's just do that again. It shows what it'll do is it'll interpret the lighter colours as being height for the purposes of a normal map and the darker colours as depth. So instead of it being a flat surface with bumps, regular bumps like that, it'll do something like that. So we'll end up with a surface that looks like this, which we don't necessarily want because it's interpreting the darker colours as depth and the lighter colours as height. So when we are, if we're working with 2D images and we're converting those to be used as normal maps, we have to work in such a way that we can clear out the sense of 2D shadows, but it leaves us a structure that will produce what we need. So for example, let's try just doing that. Save this file, save as. Alright, so flatten that, copy, paste this into GIMP because it's easier to see. So that's one version. So we'll just convert this. Generic normal map. So let's just use the defaults. Let's go back to the other app and do let's just convert that as is. So copy. paste. And we'll convert this. Okay. Right, so we're going to toggle between the two. Well, notwithstanding there. So I don't know how clearly that's going to come through on screen, but we can see that there's a difference between the two normal maps that are produced based on how we filter out, should we say, the shading and the highlights. So we've got these areas that we need to control. So depending on how you want to work with your images, they can be filtered out or exaggerated in various different ways to produce an effect that we can then convert into a normal map. But depending on how we do it, the result will differ. So the second one, that won't look quite as, it won't look quite as, what's the word? It won't match what we're trying to do in IMVU as well as the first one, because the first one just creates depth, height and depth, but the second one, whilst it does create height and depth, it does create height and depth, it does it in a way that emphasizes. So we have these, it's quite difficult to explain this without having a dynamic light that you can shine over something in order for you to actually see the consequences, the results of the way that normal maps work. So we have these structures we can see. So looking at this section here, just this little part, our eyes can determine that that's shaped like that because we have a slightly lighter color palette on one side than we do on the other. So to us, that looks like a three-dimensional structure. But to the normal map, that's going to do something that looks a little odd because it'll sort of invert on itself when it should be doing just a simple hump. The first version will do that. The second version won't. So let's just test that. Let's save this. Save as. Wakey. So this is brown carpet normal. So save that just so we have it and then export. Right, so we want PNG. That's all right. Export. Export. And then import that into Studio. So where's our carpet? rug, normal map. And again, this will be tricky to see because we're not dealing with fully dynamic environments where we've got moving lights. Although I do understand, oh there we go, see? See how that's changed? So let's just unassign that asset. Preview. The suspension is killing me. So we have the 2D image only at the moment. So if you put the normal map back, it changes the appearance of the map, carpet, the rug. It's a shame there isn't a dynamic light that can be. Is there a? How do we do that in this inventory? Furniture. Now, which one has a light? No, need a furniture item with a light. Oh, there we go. Whoops. Can we see how? So if we move that into the center of the carpet, can we see how we've now got these little striations that are responding in relation to the light? Whoops. I can't move it. Why can't I move it? And it's the same for the walls. So we can see how the walls, close those, how they're shading as the light changes. Whoops. So what's that? Oh, that's a furniture node. God, this is a bit tricky to move this. Whoops. But I don't know how easy that is to see. But let's material. So let's go for the walls again. Where are the walls? Oh, there we go. So, if we keep an eye on this section and how that is shading relative to the light, and assign the asset. And it's gone. The effect has disappeared. So let's put that back. So keep an eye on this feature. How it now responds to the light. And that's notwithstanding it looking a little bit brighter, but that is going to be our shininess map. We might be able to get away with just using our grayscale image. Or did we save that? Didn't save that, so for the wall, that's a template for the wall. So it uses the same principle. So what we can do with this is just flatten all of that and just save this out temporarily as our shininess map. And this can be JPEG. It's just that the normal map doesn't want to be. Load that into Studio. And this will make the wall go really shiny. When it decides to load. So that is super duper polished wood. But that's being produced by the normal map. Well, the shininess isn't, but the structure that we can see, the impression of the structure, that is being provided by the normal map. And if you do use normal maps, you'll want to use your shininess as well, because that enhances the effect, as we can see. So we've now got a much more subtle shininess effect. So it is now well polished and used wood. Do the same thing with our bench, the leather seats. Couch. Oh, we do have shininess. Right, so save that. Oh, we've already done one. So let's load the couch shininess in. That's a JPEG. And we're using the same base image to produce all of these, so that all the features within the image, or all the features that are described by the image, they all highlight and emphasize each other. So that's not gone quite as... That's not quite as shiny because we used an image that was already quite dark to start with. So we'll increase the reflectivity and see what that does. Ooh, not much. So let's just do that. Resave. And load that. New version in. So there we go. Super shiny leather couch. So you can, or if you make the shininess map too bright, you can always reduce its reflectivity, but you can't go the other way really. But we can see all that patination that we can see, all that elephant skin patina. That's the normal map doing that. So there we go, that's reduced it a little bit. So we now have used leather couches. Well used. We do the same thing with the lights as well. Let's have a look at those. That's the lamps. That's all they are. So let's have a look. Let's just try desaturating. So flatten everything, desaturate, get it all back to grayscale. Let's just do a quick conversion. So we'll copy this into GIMP. It's 512. Paste. Generic normal map. So there is our normal map. We just want some basic shapes just to show this. Export. PNG. PNG. All lamps normal. Export. So let's just bring this in. Lamps, unlit, lit. Right, normal map. PNG. There it is. Preview. We might not be able to see this as readily because of the nature of what the object is, or the surface is. So let's load in the shininess map and use this. Select, load. So we can see just from what's being done today, we can see that Studio still has performance issues, shall we say. Loading images, editing images, swapping and changing images, and just this preview feature. No idea why this does what it does, except that it may be sending information back and forth to IMVU to verify whatever it is that it's doing. No idea. So that's still not super duper clear because we've got lights, because it's self-illuminating. I wonder if we can disable that and do that. Oh, so there we go. It's we can see that it's really, really bright now and responding to the light that's in the scene. We can't really see the normalized effect because of the nature of the surfaces or the object that's being shown, but it looks like shiny glass now, I guess. And that's with self-illuminating off. So we can see that it's worth adding, if you're going to use Studio, it's worth playing around with normal maps and shininess maps. But do so knowing that you have to think about how you create your normal maps. So however you've made your original texture, what you generally don't want to be doing is just, let's just convert this. What you generally don't want to be doing is just doing straight conversions. So you're desaturating everything. Copy. It'll work in some instances, but not all. So not all, but some. New. We want, that's 256 wide, 512 high. Okay. Paste. Let's just filter this directly. Generic. Normal map. We can't quite see it here, but we've got a little bit of distortion. Let's zoom in a little bit. Got a little bit of distortion here because the texture wasn't painted. Well, the texture's painted for where, used leather. So what will generally happen then is generic normal map. It's not especially clear, but this area where we had the lighter colors is indented in the normal map instead of doing what you might expect it to, which is to raise. So if we just okay that, actually let's try increasing the scale to 20. Okay, let's save this, export. So we'll export this as normal map number 2. PNG. Right place, PNG, export. And then load this in on our couch. So we can see what it's doing right now. So replace that. Where did that go? Oh, there it is. So keep an eye on how that deforms. So it'll be this slightly lighter area that we can see. So at the moment it's flat, relatively speaking, across the entire width of the chair. And the only feature that we're seeing are these slight waves and the elephant skin of the leather. So if we now preview this, wait for it. It's now emphasized, it's overemphasized the elephant skin effect. Come on, catch up. But for this, it hasn't done too much to this shape. But what we can see is that it's made the elephant skin effect look a little odd, because it's done what we were talking about earlier. Whoops. It's like it's like the shadows of a brick wall, the shadows between the mortar, or the shadows underneath the brick whilst showing. So if you had your brick wall like so, you'd have a shadow underneath the brick, but you'd still have the mortar showing, which is a brighter, much brighter colour. So you end up with these, so that would be the face of your brick. The shadow would indent, and then you get the mortar sticking out, because the mortar, being a lighter colour than even probably the brick, would be interpreted as height. So for the elephant skin, we've got the same sort of problem. Let's see if we can increase the contrast. Yeah, so for the elephant skin, we've got the same sort of problem as a brick. So if we imagine that these shapes are our bricks, so we've got dark on one side, which is the shadow, and then we've got the highlight on the other, which is the mortar. And what that ends up doing is creating our shapes, but it makes them three-dimensional incorrectly. So we end up with, whoops, I'm trying to think. So we end up with, so that would be, if we were looking at our object from the side, so that would be our shape. We've got the shadow on this side, which is depth, and then we've got the highlight on the other side, which is height. So we end up with that sort of thing in between our shapes. And we naturally want to avoid these peaks and troughs being in the wrong place, because what we want is that. So we have light, 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 dark, dark, and that creates the depth impression. But if you have a light highlight on this side and a dark highlight on this side, you produce this. So it does that, which in IMVU means that our surface, so we can just about see it here on these sections, those are being incorrectly lit because those are highlights in the elephant skin. So that's these pale bits. So those are raised above the surface. We want to avoid all of that. So let's put the old one back in. Whilst we're zoomed in. Couch. Preview. So there we can see that the elephant texture is properly lit, or lit in a better way. Let's do the carpet as well. Carpet, no, that's the rug. Oh, we didn't do one for that, so nope, 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 yes. Just use this. Load that in. Preview. So we can see what it's doing right now. It really takes its time. Ooh, there's our shiny plastic rug. But you can see how the shininess map emphasizes the normal map effect, or the effect of the normal map. So all of that crinkly texture, that's the normal map. So let's reduce this. Let's reduce this a little bit. Still got the same effect. That's our plastic chintzy carpet rug. Yeah, have to change the values of the shininess map, but we can definitely see the normal map effect. So we'll end it there, because this is it's quite repetitive in the sense of this. Each normal map doesn't necessarily isn't necessarily adding anything to the process. It's just that each normal map has to be made to fit the texture that you are producing for your object or the surface that you are. Doesn't help that Studio's a bit slow. So it's worth looking at these. So if you are going to look at come on, Studio. If you're going to look at using Studio instead of using Classic, so we can see the difference. So this is Classic. That's obviously minus normal maps and shininess maps. And that's Studio with shininess maps and normal maps. And depending on how you get them set up, it can be very, very effective. But it's worth spending time to set up your normal maps if you're not going to model things and do them from baked 3D. Where is that? So we've got a few of these. So baked 3D, normal maps, IMVU Studio. Yes, those two. It's worth looking at using normal maps properly in terms of spending a bit of time playing around with them. What I may do is, where's it gone? provide an example file. With some assets. Some assets that can be played around with and converted to produce normal maps. And then you'll be able to load those into Studio. But it's definitely worth taking a look at. The only thing to watch out for, I guess, at this point is that obviously we have a 2 megabyte limit on our files, our projects. So if we now start adding extra sets of images, so an extra set of normal maps and an extra set of shininess maps, that's going to affect the file size. So for rooms in particular, we need to be careful just how many texture slots we're using to texture our projects and our products. Because I would imagine that we're going to be hitting texture limits quite quickly. But that is IMVU Studio and taking a pretty in-depth look at normal maps, how to make them from 2D images, and the shininess or specular maps. So we can see how all those surfaces that we've applied normal maps and specular maps to are shining and lighting in response to the light that's in the scene, whereas all the other surfaces that are still left pretty much untouched, other than the diffuse, they're not doing anything, they're not responding at all. So it's definitely worth looking at normal maps and shininess maps. Right, so we'll call it quits there. That's quite a bit of info to go over with normal maps. But they are definitely worth looking at. So play around with them. So if you've got GIMP, or you can download GIMP, I think it's gimp.org, and it's got its own tool to convert them, and that's just filters, generic, normal map. I don't know if any other photo editing apps have these tools, so you might have to download a third-party tool or filter, but GIMP definitely can do it. So there we go. We'll call it quits there, and we shall see you on the next video, whenever that is. We've got Christmas coming up soon, so maybe doing something for that. Right, we shall see you anon.